We have just a few minutes, as it turns out, left for questions. And I'm going to go straight to the questions that we've got from some of our listeners, if I can. And I'm going to ask the respondents to try to make your answers as brief as possible so that we can get a few questions in. I'm going to start with this one to you, Fabio, that somebody asked, how would you describe the Chinese public's reaction, if any, to the dangerous economic and political antagonism between China and the US? And how have Chinese, these are really two questions, how have Chinese people been demonized in America and blamed for the spread of COVID-19? You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry, that's a difficult question to answer because it's very difficult to have a survey of Chinese people and Chinese people opinion, and also it's very difficult to figure out what they are actually saying. But anecdotally, you get a little bit of everything. There are strangely pro-Trump people in China, pro-Trump intellectuals, fairly vocal in China, for a reason that I cannot understand, but there are. There is always a fair amount of, I would say, nationalism in China that really parallel nationalism in the US, and which is actually in large part fomented by the current administration. So there is pride in what China has achieved, pride in China's role in the world, and very, very and therefore, there is this. I think there is a very fairly diffuse sentiment that we have been put down for so long. Now it's our time. So what do you want? Why are you just trying to push us down? And these are all lies, and so on and so forth. At the very beginning, it was very silly, but at the very beginning of the pandemic, especially the pandemic in the US and in Europe, the message that this was the China virus was a counter propaganda from China, or at least from minor parts of the Chinese government, or at least the Chinese propaganda machine, that was saying, no, it's the US that gave us the virus. It was completely silly on both sides, but clearly very dangerous. So it's very difficult to answer this question, but there are at least in place some elements that are very dangerous also within China, especially the rabid nationalism that's been sort of cultivated in the last decades or so.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn to a question for you, Brett. Someone asked, isn't the fact that the US was founded as a Christian nation by pilgrims, doesn't this add to the history or pattern of oppression against Asians, many of whom weren't Christian, and with the point that many Christians weren't tolerant of other religions and people who don't believe in Jesus Christ?
Well, I mean, we could point to certain historical foundations or certain kind of rhetorics about what makes the pure moral core of America. We could talk about that, which is, I think, what you're referring to. But I'd also like to just point out that Asian Pacific Americans have been Christian at a pretty high rate. Like American seminaries have a whole lot, are basically being buoyed by Korean Americans and their participation in American Christian seminaries. So that's just one example. Japanese Americans today are about a third non-religious, a third Buddhist, and a third Christian. We can go Filipinos, almost like a large number of Catholics. So we can keep going on and on about the Christian participation. And that unfortunately has never translated into a better access into to acceptance. Basically, every Asian Pacific American group has said, hey, look how Christian we are. And we could look at Pacific Islanders in Hawaii who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a large percentage. And they said, look how great we are in your church. And they were like, no, we don't want you as part of it. Korean Americans, same thing, large percentage. Japanese Americans, large percentage. Chinese Americans, large percentage, relatively speaking. and yet still that doesn't translate into it. So one thing I'd point to is why this is the case. And I didn't do this in this lecture because it would get too long, but the origins of the Yellow Peril is also primarily based in anti-Catholicism. The same rhetorics around anti-Asian rhetoric was often based around anti-Pope rhetoric. And so they would talk about these great dear leaders of Italy, you know, like of the Catholic Roman hierarchy, and how all these poor immigrants from Europe were sent here to invade the United States and upend our economy. So they're definitely Christians. There's no doubt that they were Christian, but the question is what kind of Christian, right? So same thing goes with Asians. They would say, what kind of Christian are you? Or already the idea against Asians or in Pacific Islands are based within the anti-Catholic rhetoric. So I'll also point to that too.
Okay, thank you. We're actually really out of time, but I'm going to allow one more question. And I'd like to thank all of the viewers who put in questions, and I will encourage the panelists maybe to answer questions as you feel appropriate, even though we're not going to get time to address them here today. But I thought I would end with one kind of more general question, to kind of throw it out to the group. Someone asked, why was the US so late to recognize the China threat? Fabio?
Sorry,
You
it
need
depends what you mean by threat. I mean,
Yeah.
in what sense is China a threat? To what is China a threat? Is it a military threat? I don't think so, and I haven't heard anybody who thinks so, except some, you know, crazy people who want to us to buy more, you know, aircraft carriers and crazy planes. China is China an economic threat? Maybe, but given how the two economies are interdependent, well, I would actually, I mean, I would, how so? I mean, is China is it possible that China will become the first economy in the world? Yes. Is that a threat? It depends what you want to do, you know, it depends to what is a threat to what. I mean, is it a threat to American hegemony? Maybe. So you have to consider what kind of, what are you willing to do to this perceived threat? I would not consider China a threat. I don't know how you would even describe it. For definitely, China is part of this interconnected economy. And is sometimes a good actor, sometimes a really bad one, like other countries. So again, I mean, I would qualify the very notion of a threat from China.
Okay, thank you, panelists. Thank you, all of you. It's great. Hai, would you like to say something?
Yeah.
But please try to make it brief. We are over time.
Yes, I recognize that. So there's one question I feel obligated to answer because it's a factual information.
Okay.
It's a short one. So somebody asked about, in my presentation, I mentioned about Dr. Li Wenliang, who was a whistleblower and was arrested. Then the Chinese embassy denied his arrest. I think depends on how do we interpret arrest, right? He was visited by a local police, asked him to sign a document to confess. So that was the document I show in my slide for talking about this virus in the WeChat group, right? So, but he wasn't really put in the prison or anything. So I want to clarify that since that's a factual information. Thank you.
Okay, good. Thank you for clarifying that. That is important. So I think we should, because of the time constraints, we should conclude our discussion for today. But I'd like to remind people, especially our viewers, that this is the first of we don't know how many yet, but several we hope that we have planned of webinars like this. And already Professor Isaki, you're going to be speaking as part of the Humanities Festival later this month, I believe. And Professor Lanza, you've got a event coming up in November. And I don't have the precise information on any of those right at the moment, but they will be announced. And also as a department, I'm hoping that we will have some kind of follow-up webinars, the content of which is yet to be determined, but you get an idea of how we'll conduct ourselves. And the thing is, we're a Department of East Asian Studies. We've got a lot of people with a lot of resources. There are lots of things that we can and feel like we should do under the current environment. So I'd like to really thank our panelists for contributing. All very, very interesting, very informative presentations, and very timely as well. And also, I'd like to thank the audience members who came and watched. We hope we'll entice you to come to further events. I'd like to thank COH Computing Service for their assistance with this and helping us to run this. And last but not least, I'd like to thank you, Stephanie Mao, for kind of propping us up behind the scenes and making us make not too many significant mistakes anyway. Okay, thank you. I wish you well, have a great evening, and hope to see you next time.